Broadcasting from beautiful downtown Tallahassee, it's Nantan Lupan.
Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. Today we have the third of our back-to-school movies, and it's the first of its kind. Today's film is Blackboard Jungle, 1955. When this film was released, it shocked a post-war American audience. Glenn Ford does a great job in this role, and it surprised me because I know him primarily as a cowboy actor or as Superman's dad if you're younger. Glenn Ford plays first-time teacher Richard Didier. Ford was born in Canada in 1916 and moved to the U.S. when he was 8. After high school, he began working in theater and taking odd jobs, including one with Will Rogers, who taught him how to ride a horse. Wow! In 1939, he began working for Columbia Pictures and became a U.S. citizen the same year. His first major role was Heaven with a Barbed Wire Fence, 1939. In late 1942, Ford joined the Marine Corps Reserve. He spent his time working in the photographic section. He was discharged in 1944 for ulcers. In 1958, he returned as a reserve officer. Ford's best-known role is most likely the film noir classic Gilda, 1946, with co-star Rita Hayworth. This pair eventually made 5 movies together. Through the 50s and 60s, Ford's career was on fire. He made thrillers, dramas, action, comedies, and westerns. Some of his best-known films include A Stolen Life with Bette Davis, The Secret of Convict Lake with Gene Tierney, The Big Heat, Blackboard Jungle, Framed, Interrupted Melody, Experiment in Terror with Lee Remick, Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Jubal, The Fastest Gun Alive, 3:10 to Yuma, Cimarron, The Tea House of the August Moon, Don't Go Near the Water, The Gazebo, Cry for Help, and The Courtship of Eddie's Father. However, my favorite Ford movie is The Violent Men, 1955. Ford stars as a peaceful man returning from the Civil War who faces a fight with Barbara Stanwyck, Brian Keith, and Edward G. Robinson. The 70s found Ford working in television. In 1978, Ford was cast as Superman's Earth father, Jonathan Kent. In his final scene, Rock Around the Clock is playing on the radio. In Superman Returns, 2006, with Eva Marie Saint as Martha, there is a picture of Ford on the mantle. Ford died in 2006 at the age of 90. Anne Francis played the role of Anne Didier, the wife of Richard. Born in New York in 1930, Anne was a model by the age of 6 and on Broadway by the age of 11. Following World War II, MGM put the blue-eyed star under contract. All of her films were below her talent level. She worked in television and on the stage for a time. When she signed with 20th Century Fox, she got the same treatment. She had 3 standout roles, which include The Troubled Wife in Blackboard Jungle, 1955, Forbidden Planet, 1966, and the wonderfully intense drama Bad Day at Black Rock, 1955, with Spencer Tracy. The 1960s found Francis working in television. She had a very short run as a karate-chopping detective on Honey West, 1965. While she made a few movies, they never really let her shine. She died in 2011 of cancer. Francis, like Betty Field and so many others, never found the vehicle that would show the star she was. Lewis Calhern played the role of Jim Murdoch, the teacher that had contempt for the students. Calhern was generally cast as an aristocrat. He was picked by a talent scout while playing football. He worked in the theater in New York until he had to serve in France during World War I. After the war, he returned to the theater and eventually found his way into the movies. His greatest role was that of a lawyer working with criminals on a heist. He was also creepy as the lover of the very young Marilyn Monroe in the movie The Asphalt Jungle, 1950. He died of a heart attack while filming The Tea House of the August Moon, 1956. Margaret Hayes played the role of new teacher Lois Hammond. This auburn-haired beauty often played the other woman. The Blackboard Jungle was no exception. Her and Richard were drawn to each other and had some strong sexual tension. Hayes left acting in 1962 and worked in fashion, public relations, and as a fashion editor. Later, she returned to the stage and to television. Emile Meyer played the role of veteran teacher Mr. Calhern. He was the hammer for the principal. Meyer was born in New Orleans in 1910 and worked playing a tough guy in movies. Some of his best-known roles are as Riker in Shane, 1953, as Father Dupree in the anti-war Paths of Glory, 1957, with Kirk Douglas, and the corrupt and brutal cop in The Sweet Smell of Success, 1957, with Burt Lancaster and Tony Curtis. His last role was The Legend of Frank Woods, 1977, and he died a decade later. Basil Ruysdael had a very small role in the Blackboard Jungle. As Richard's professor A.R. Corral, Basil Ruysdael had a very small role in the Blackboard Jungle as Richard's professor A.R. Corral. Ruysdael was born in 1878. During the World War I period, he was the leading bass singer at the Met. He had the honor of playing Detective Hennessy in the very first Marx Brothers movie, The Coconuts, 1929. He had roles in Broken Arrow, 1950, People Will Talk, 1951, The Violent Men, 1955, Blackboard Jungle, 1955, Jubal, 1956, The Last Hurrah, 1958, with Spencer Tracy, and The Horse Soldiers, 1959, with William Holden and John Wayne. In The Horse Soldiers, he played the head of a Confederate boys' school sent out to stop the Yankee Raiders. His last acting role was The Story of Ruth, 1960, and he did voice work for 101 Dalmatians, 1961. However, he died before it was released. Sidney Poitier played troubled student Gregory Miller. Poitier was covered in Episode 14, Band of Angels, 1957, and Episode 23, The Longships, 1964. Vic Marrow played troubled student and real pain in the ass Artie West. Morrow was born in New York in 1929. He dropped out of high school to join the Navy. Following the Navy, he studied pre-law at Florida State University. Go Noles! He was cast in a school play and was hooked on acting. His first role was in the Blackboard Jungle, 1955. Since he played a punk in this movie, he quickly became typecast. He left MGM after a few years and studied directing at USC. Morrow had success on the television series Combat, 1962. By 1967, his career and personal life were in shambles. He did a few movies such as Dirty Mary and Crazy Larry, 1974, and The Bad News Bears, 1976. With his personal life again in shambles, he turned to the bottle. By 1982, he was ready to return to his career. He began working on Twilight Zone the movie, 1983, but he was killed on July 23, 1982, when a stunt explosion caused a helicopter to crash land on him and two children that were working in the film. Jamie Farr was cast as a mentally challenged student named Santini. The Blackboard Jungle, 1955, was his first role. After this, he was drafted and sent to Japan and Korea. He had a few more movie roles, but I just wanted to mention that he was the cross-dressing corporal on MASH. At the time this movie was made, Morrow was 26 and Poitier was 28. A little old for high school. Morrow beat out Steve McQueen for the role of Artie. Louis Gossett Jr. was considered for the role of Miller. 3 other future stars can be seen in this movie. The first is Richard Deacon, who had a small role as one of the teachers. He is well known as the straight man, Mel Cooley, on The Dick Van Dyke Show. The second actor was Valentin de Vargas, who played evil gangster Pancho in Touch of Evil, 1958. Finally, there was a quick shot of James Drury as the hospital attendant. Drury was best known as television's The Virginian. Story. This movie takes place after World War II, when servicemen and women were returning to America and getting busy living again after what they had been through. So when the teachers arrived at the school, many had seen the horrors of war and shouldn't be shaken by what they would see in the classroom. This movie wasn't released until after the Korean War, so it could appear that this was the war that was referenced. This movie was the first to use a real rock and roll song, when at the time, mainstream America felt that rock and roll might be the cause of the problems and not just the manifestation of the problem. The song was Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and the Comet. This song is extremely tame by modern standards, and I had to check to make sure it wasn't used as the Happy Days theme. Oddly, the song has had a detrimental effect on our society. I will explain. In 705, Sir Edmund Halley calculated the return of the comet that bears his name. This was done with calculations of gravitational effect and historical records. However, ever since Bill Haley and the Comets, Halley's Comet has often been incorrectly referred to as Halley's Comet. In an oddity of fate, Halley never saw the comet that bears his name. The movie begins with Richard Dadier, Glenn Ford, arriving by bus at a school. Some boys are out front swing dancing to kill time. Although Dadier didn't receive the sexual harassment that Sir did in To Sir With Love 1967, To Sir With Love 1967 seemed to copy many elements from this earlier movie. Dadier meets the school principal, Mr. Warnicki, John Hoyt, for his second interview. Warnicki is kind of a hard-ass and questions Dadier about attending a girls' school and not being able to project his voice. Dadier says he was in theater at college and does the Siege of Harfleur speech from Shakespeare's Henry V. You know, once more into the breach, dear friends. This is a classic metaphor for the work ahead and the war that was left behind. He gets the teaching job at the all-boys trade school in a rough part of New York City. He meets some of the other teachers such as Josh Edwards, Richard Kiley, who is a new teacher and is into jazz record. New teacher and local hottie Lois Hammond, Margaret Hayes, jaded veteran teacher Jim Murdoch, Lewis Calhern, and super tough, heavy, and hammer of the principal, Mr. Calhern, Emile Meyer. Dadier meets his wife, Anne Dadier, played by Anne Francis, in an Italian restaurant. It is at this point you find out that Anne is 4 months pregnant and has already had one miscarriage. They have champagne and ravioli, an odd choice for an expectant mother by our standards. As the happy couple leaves the restaurant, 2 drag racers knock another car over and they are missed by a mile. He does more damage grabbing Anne and shaking her to see if she's okay. Anyway, the cars are more wild youths with no regard for society. On the first day of school, the assembled student body is going wild. Lois Hammond was hooted and whistled at and stumbles badly. Mr. Halloran shouts him down. Dadier takes his class and has Artie West, Vic Marrow, and he finds out later he has Gregory Miller, Sidney Poitier as well. He finds Miller in the head smoking. Miller gives him the business, calling him Chief. When Dadier is writing his name on the board, a baseball whizzes by his head, hitting the blackboard. Dadier plays it cool by saying whomever threw that ball will never play for the Yankees. Pete Morales, Rafael Campos, changes Dadier to Daddy-O. They find out that Santini, Jamie Farr, is mentally deficient. Dadier singles out Miller and asks him to be a leader for good in the class. Miller considers it. Miss Hammond is going to give Dadier a ride, and she goes downstairs ahead. While adjusting her hose on the stairs, she is watched by a student. When Dadier goes down, he sees a woman's shoe in the hallway. He breaks into the locked classroom and stops the rape from happening. The boy jumps through a closed window, and Dadier pulls him back through the glass in a moment of righteous justice. Dadier's wife, Anne, is getting jealous of Miss Hammond. When school resumes, the students believe that Dadier beat the boy for no reason. The class turns ice cold and has a grammar riot. Dadier tries to talk to Miller again, but Miller is not having any of it. Joshua Edwards and Dadier go for a drink at a bar that is apparently right across the street from the school. While they are drinking, Edwards shows his love for jazz. They keep drinking, and when they go outside, it's dark, and Edwards says, "Let's cut through the alley." Now, when you're in a big city and someone says, "Let's cut through the alley," you say, "Go ahead, I'll walk around." Of course, Artie and his gang of white X-wearing hoods are waiting outside. They jump the 2 teachers, and combat veteran Dadier makes a show for a while, but is overwhelmed and beaten. The cops roll in and the gang scatters. No arrest. I have to make one comment about the gang. It was a multiracial gang only seen on television. No blacks, but Italian, Irish, and Puerto Ricans.
Oh no, it's a multiracial TV gang, including white guys.
Well, what do we got here? Let's beat him up, but not because of his color, because that doesn't matter to us.
Artie calls Anne and preys on her jealousy about Mrs. Hammond. Dadier makes it home as a beaten pulp. Dadier wonders what he is doing trying to teach these animals. He goes to see his old college professor, A.R. Corral, Basil Ruysdael. Corral peps him up and gives him hope for the future. A week later, Dadier returns to school. The detective, Horace McMahon, wants Dadier to ID the students, but he refuses to help. At one point, they say the fathers are at war and the mothers are in defense plants, so they have no home lives. They have put in a machine shop above his class, and it is hard to teach. He brings in a tape recorder and wants to record the boys. Artie and Miller manipulate Daddy-A into recording the heavily accented voice of Morales. Then they accuse Daddy-A of racism. He tries to give them a lesson on race and drops the N-bomb, says Spick, and Mick. The next day, Daddy-A is called into Mr. Warnicke's office. On the way in, you find out that Mr. Murdoch has slapped a student. Daddy-A is accused of racism and is not given the opportunity to explain himself. After the ass-chewing, he gets put in charge of the Christmas pageant. Later, Daddy-A is coming out of Miss Hammond's room and sees Miller on the stairs and accuses Miller of ratting him out. Miller is defensive, and at one point, Daddy-A says, "Why, you black," and then he controls himself. As it gets dark, Artie and his gang are planning a robbery of a news truck. When Daddy-A sees the robbery, Artie throws a bottle at him and then pretends to rescue him. Daddy-A knows he is part of the robbery. Artie doesn't care if he goes to juvie, as it will keep him out of the army later. The next school day, Edwards is attacked by his class and they break all of his precious jazz records. They shove and trip Edwards. Daddy-A finds him shaking and asking why. In the teacher's lounge, we learn that all of the record breakers were sentenced to write, "I will respect other people's property," 500 times. Daddy-A chews the other teachers out and then admits he doesn't know the answers, but he knows beating them like they get at home is not the answer. Anne gets a handwritten letter saying, "Watch out, there is another woman." She heads to the school, and Mrs. Hammond comes out just before Mr. Daddy-A. By this point, you are beginning to wonder what is going on. He sees his wife, and she shows him another letter from Professor Corral saying he can get him a job at a better school. As the Christmas pageant draws nearer, Daddy-A comes to school and finds Miller and 5 other guys singing a beautiful version of "Let My People Go." Daddy-A asks Miller to be in the show and also what the rules were. Daddy-A is playing with a lock, perhaps representing the struggle they are all having. Daddy-A shows his class a Jack and the Beanstalk cartoon. They are all enjoying it except Artie, who is making a stinkapus face. After the film, everyone except Artie is engaged in talking about the ethics.
Now, all your lives you're going to hear stories. What some guy tells you, what you see in books and magazines, on the television, radio, what you read in the newspapers. But if you can just examine the story, look for the real meaning. And most of all, fellas, if you just learn to think for yourself.
Here it comes. Here comes the commercial.
He has gotten through to them for the first time. Miller is showing leadership while Artie carves the deaths with a switchblade. Anne gets another letter, and we see that she has many of them. Another call says her husband is with her. This is correct, but they are at the Christmas pageant rehearsal. Mrs. Hammond puts the bum rush on Daddy-A, but he ain't having any.
Tell me, Rick, don't you ever get fed up with this place? Don't you ever get tired of teaching? Don't you feel that you want to throw your briefcase away and take a flyer someplace? Any place. With me, maybe. Don't you? Don't you, Rick? I guess not. You'd like to, all right, but you're married. You're married, and I'm bored. You're afraid, and I'm choosy.
Anne gets another call as Daddy-A walks with Miller to his job as a mechanic. He says he will not quit teaching if Miller stays in school. When Daddy-A gets home, his wife is being taken away in an ambulance because of pains. She has the baby 2 months early. The landlady brings Daddy-A the letters, and he is completely done with the school. Jim Murdoch says that Daddy-A has gotten through, and the teachers are motivated as well. By New Year's, the baby is okay, and Anne talks her husband into staying with teaching. Back in the classroom, Artie is cheating on an assignment. Daddy-A tells him to bring his paper. When Miller suggests he does what he is told, Artie calls him a black boy, and they almost get into a fight. Daddy-A tells Artie to go to the principal, but he pulls out his switchblade.
Come on. For a bright boy, you didn't learn nothing. Well, take me down. Come on. Step right up and taste a little of this, Daddy-O. Give me that knife, West. What do you want it? You want it in the belly? How about in the face, huh? Give me that knife. Here it is. All you gotta do is take it. Now, come on. Come on, take it. Come on. Take it easy, Chief. He's crazy. He's high. He's floating on Sneaky Pete wine.
As Artie backs away, one boy closes the curtains, and another sneaks up behind Daddy-A. Miller smashes the sneak into the wall, and Artie cuts the teacher's hand. Artie begs for help. Finally, Daddy-A takes the knife away, and shakes the hell out of him. Balazzi, Dan Terranova, picks up the knife and tries to get out, but no one will help. Santini, Jamie Farr, uses the flagpole as a battering ram and hits Belzini in the chest. Morales picks up the knife as Artie screams, "Use it, use it." He breaks the blade, making it useless. Daddier takes the two boys to the office with the consent of the class. As Daddier walks out of the building with his hand wrapped, Miller confirms their deal, and they both stay at the school. World-famous short summary: high school students are bastard people. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please tell your friends. And if you really want to help, drop over to iTunes and give me a review. If you want to comment, recommend a movie, or just say hi, follow the links in the show notes to my site. Beware the Moors.